selecting a sample. Now, when we're selecting a sample from a population, the method we use depends on whether we're sampling from a finite population or an infinite population. So let's start with a finite population. If we're sampling from a finite population, we want to take what's called a simple random sample. Now, a simple random sample is a sample selected such that each possible sample of the same size is equally likely. So for example, if we're taking samples of size 10 from the population, every possible sample of size 10 has the same chance of being selected. Now let's take a look at an example. Suppose that we're sampling from a population of size 5. So this is a finite population, capital N is equal to 5. Now let's say that the elements in our population are labeled A, B, C, D, and E. And we want to take a sample of size 2, so lowercase n is equal to 2, and we want our sample to be a simple random sample. So let's start off by listing all the possible samples of size 2. So one possible sample is A and B. Another possible sample is A and C, and so on. A, D, A, E, B, C, B, D, B, E, C, D, C, E, and D, E. So we have a total of 10 possible samples of size 2 from this population of size 5. So if we want our sample to be a simple random sample, each of these 10 samples has to have the same chance of being selected, which means the probability of each sample being selected has to be equal to 1 over 10. Now, how do we select a sample so that each of these samples has a probability of 1 over 10 of being selected? Well, what we can do is we can use random numbers. Using a computer program such as Microsoft Excel or R, we can use a random number generator to generate some random numbers to select our sample. So let's take a look at how this would work. First, what we would want to do is we would want to number the elements in our population. So we could say A is number 1, B is number 2, C is number 3, D is number 4, and E is number 5. Then we would want to generate 2 random numbers between 1 and 5. So suppose we used Excel to generate 2 random numbers, and the numbers we generated were 3 and 5. Well, 3 corresponds to C, and 5 corresponds to E. So the sample we would have selected is CE. Now this sample would be a simple random sample because all the other samples of size 2 had the same probability of being selected. Now, there are two different types of simple random samples. We can use sampling without replacement Sampling without replacement means that previously used random numbers are ignored. So for example, say that the first random number we generated was 3, and the second random number we generated was also 3. So what we would do in sampling without replacement is we would ignore the second 3 and then choose another random number. Say we got 4 for our next random number, then our sample would be C and D. Now this is the preferred method of sampling. An alternative method of sampling is called sampling with replacement. In sampling with replacement, previously used random numbers are acceptable. So for example, suppose the first random number we chose was 3, and then we choose 3 again. So we don't ignore the second 3, we accept it, so our sample would be CC. So the same element is allowed to repeat in the sample. Now, although sampling without replacement is the preferred method, sampling with replacement is a valid way of choosing a simple random sample. So this is a valid method. Now, if we're sampling from an infinite population, we want to select what's called a random sample. So for a finite population, we select a simple random sample. For an infinite population, we select a random sample. A random sample is a sample selected such that two criteria are satisfied. The first one is that each element comes from the same population, and the second criteria is that each element is selected independently.